Well, hey everybody, welcome to Creative Goo here on Thursday night on a crazy week for Gooey Cube. I'll talk more about that in a second, but first I want to do a sound check. So, who's out there and who can hear me? Anybody? I can see you. Yay! How's the echo today? Oh, perfect. All right. So I still haven't figured out where the echo is coming from, but I've muted everything except my microphone. So I can't hear myself. I don't know how it's going. So glad it's working for everybody. Welcome. I'm Harry. I'm the host of Creative Goo. This is the Gooey Cube Twitch channel, and they're sponsoring this episode as usual. And you can find my stuff on my mini factory. I do lots of sculpting for gaming, and this channel is all about gaming, and my stream's all about all of the hobbies around it, the creative side. Now, I've been talking about sculpting for quite a few episodes. Tonight will be no exception, but first, I do want to remind you, if you haven't already heard, there's a Kickstarter going on right now. Let's see if I can even show you. There we go. The Tomb of Gax is out now in Kickstarter, and we have funded quite a bit, $300,000 plus, and we're looking to keep finding people to support this particular Kickstarter. It's an homage to Gary Gygax, who was the co-founder of D&D, so we're very close to many of our hearts. I actually met Gary once, and very nice man. He has a reputation of being a killer GM, but I had no problems talking to him. Didn't play at his table, unfortunately. And of course, I've met all the people involved in this project. Well, all of the GUI people involved in this project, and a couple of the luminaries that are part of this particular Kickstarter. So if you have a mind to, check it out. Love to have you guys support it. And that's the end of my commercial. So thank you all for being patient with me. All right. So today I was going to talk about posing miniatures, or posing digital sculptures that will ultimately become miniatures. So that's what I was going to talk about. It's probably going to be the one of the last sculpting videos I do for a while, and then I want to talk about other things. I am hoping to bring guests back to the show. Once I figured out my technology problems, I will do that. But I can talk about painting again. 3D printing seemed to be pretty popular, and other topics. You know, we did map making once. So if there's things you want to hear about, certainly let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go talk about ZBrush again. Before I jump to ZBrush, though, some things to think about. There's lots of ways you can pose digital figures. The term usually used is rigging, where you create a rig for your character, and then you can move that rig around and the character moves with it. This is most commonly used for CGI and animation. It can be used for miniature creation, but it's a lot of work to rig a character and then have it move. That's why you normally do it for animation and videos. So those of us that sculpt miniatures for 3D printing use other techniques, and that's what I'm going to focus on. So I have some rigging. I can at least show you guys a concept of how rigging works in ZBrush, at least. Rigging in other software gets more and more complicated, especially if you want to change the face in some way. The techniques I'm going to talk about are not really designed for changing the face. I do that manually. And so most of my expressions are very straightforward, just because of that. And remembering that when I'm printing a miniature, it's going to be an inch tall. And so a lot of the details you might put in a face are not going to even, they may print, but they also may not print depending on your printer. And as well as how is that going to look 2 feet away, 1 inch tall. And so I'm looking for broad, almost stylized faces and things like that. That's what I feel reads best on the table. Think Games Workshop and Warhammer and Warhammer 40K, the kind of expressions and character size and scale, just so it looks really cool on the tabletop. There are the companies and other sculptors that do an incredible level of detail. They're amazing artists, and it can be 3D printed, but I find that it's really fragile for gameplay. And so most of my miniatures are designed for gaming. And even my miniatures can be fragile. So if you have my STL files, just be prepared, be aware that they may be fragile and have issues if you're not careful on the table. I mean, you can repair miniatures with super glue or the hobby versions of super glue that are going to be better than something you buy at the grocery store. But just keep that in mind. And you can also, if you have the 3D printer in the first place, you can just print another copy and paint it. I often do that if a miniature breaks in play. So let me jump to ZBrush and talk about that. Most of these techniques are transferable. The tools will be different, but a lot of the techniques I'm using are really sculpting, almost brute force posing, using masking, which is common to most software, and I'll show you what masking looks like, and common to multiple pieces of software. So again, I'm not teaching people at the moment how to use ZBrush. I'm just showing the techniques I use for sculpting. If we want to do a ZBrush 101 or something like that, I'm certainly happy to do that. There's lots of videos on YouTube and other places to get that information. Some of the instructors are very, very good at it, at teaching the techniques and the software itself. Some of them are good at just seeing what's possible. I don't want to share too much about the individual people unless we may have an episode where I can talk about my favorite teachers and then my favorite artists that work in ZBrush. I might even be tempted, if there's enough interest, to go into Blender and try the Blender sculpting tools and see what we come up with. I do use an iPad for sculpting, and I find I can sculpt, but I just can't get the same level of result, the same outcome I want. Part of it's me getting practice with the tool, and part of it is the tool has limitations. So just keep that in mind, that while there's other tools, the key is for you to become really good at that tool versus having the exact perfect tool. And I've spent years learning ZBrush and learning the features and functionality, and I found tools that work for me, and that's what I focus on. Transferring that to other software, you can get good relatively quickly, but getting to great takes that same level of effort that I made in ZBrush in the first place. So just keep that in mind if you're going to pick up some of this stuff for yourself. And then maybe next week or the week after, I can talk about, okay, what does it take to make this printable? I can talk to some of the challenges, and then we'll go back to printing and painting again at another time. So here we are with a character, super simple character. He's just a dude with some shorts on, right? So you want to pose him. The other thing I can show you, I've talked about this in other episodes, is this is a demo sculpt. So I didn't make this figure. I use it sometimes as a base and then change it. But one of the things that's kind of cool is I can increase the resolution, if you will, the density of pixels, and you can already see it looks better, more detail. And there's actually another version of this model. And you can see even higher level of detail. This guy looks really amazing. So the reason we might do this is we want to maintain this high level of detail. In fact, I'll use this version because it has so many different levels. So there's 6 different levels of density of, so some of these you can't even see the difference. There we go. Now you can start seeing the squares that make up his body, the polygons. And this is the lowest level. And it's 7,000 active points. So there's 7,000 points that make up his body. The nice thing about that, though, is I can pose it more easily. And hey, Phantom, so I can pose this thing easily because there's fewer points that I have to stress about. the computer doesn't have to do as many calculations. And then once it's posed, I can go back to that high level of detail, that higher resolution, and see how it affected my model. And I'll demonstrate that here today. But those are things to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is the reason we start with this, he's in this relaxed pose. It's called the Y pose. The T pose is where his arms are straight out like a T. This Y pose is they're relaxed. It's sometimes called a relaxed pose, is because I can maintain symmetry. So you can see the little red points. If I do something, I'm going to do something crazy. Let me make sure I have the right brush selected. If I move that little point on his arm, now he has this spike coming out of his arm, but it's the same on both sides. And humans have bilateral symmetry. Most animals do. So you can work on one side and it replicates on the other side. So we get really good results. And then when you're posing, most of your posing, you turn off symmetry. But that's why he's in this pose, is you can rig the model as well as pose the model, and it's the same on both sides. And I'm going to take advantage of that in a second. The other thing to be aware, this is multiple parts. So his shorts are a separate piece, right? Just to keep that in mind. And I'll show you why that matters in a minute. He actually has eyebrows. Let me zoom in so you can see his fancy eyebrows. They're a separate piece. And his eyes are a separate piece. And that matters. And that's it. So this is still a relatively simple model, but it'll allow me to demonstrate the things you have to worry about if you want to pose. So the first thing I want to do is make him have a heroic pose. And if you've done any art at all, work with comic books or things like that, heroes have a stance. And that stance is they spread their legs out. And so that's actually a relatively easy thing to do. So I'm going to go back to the main model. And this is where masking comes in. And so I can mask top half of his body, right? And so what that means is I've blocked that off so it won't change no matter what I do. So if I try and make that spike on his arm again, I can't do it because I've masked it. This is similar to masking in Photoshop if you've ever used that. So now just his legs, you can see I've got it set up where just his legs are available to be moved. And then I have what's called this gizmo. So there's multiple move tools. This gizmo allows me to move using the arc. So using just the X axis, I guess, I'm moving his legs. Since it's symmetrical, his legs move out. Let me get that blue line again, which is what I wanted. Heroes have that wide stance. So maybe this is a little too exaggerated. So let me come back in. And that looks really good. Now, this leads to the first thing to understand. If you have multiple parts to your model, what happened? His shorts didn't change. They're the same shorts they've always been. So you have to accommodate that if you're sculpting and you haven't currently merged it into a single object. Now, if I have merged it to a single object, let's see. Do I have one? I don't have one handy. I'll show you later what you can do if you've already created a single sculpt, single object. You can manipulate that too, but it creates its own complications. So there's a couple of ways to handle this. If it's hard surface, like it's a belt or it's armor, it's a helmet, I just pose the body, then move those parts because they don't flex. If it's part of the body, I would use a different tool. I'm not going to show you that today, but there's a tool where I can work with all the parts at once and then rebuild it back into this multiple part model so that I could move the shorts at the same time. This one's so simple, I can do it separately. But basically, I could do it the same techniques, but everything's treated as one model. Maybe in another show, I can show some of those advanced techniques. So I move his legs out, but what you notice for the human being, if you just treat your legs as a stick, we have a problem. His feet are at a weird angle. They're not actually flat on the floor. So if I bring the floor back, there's a little bit of an angle there to his feet, and that's not what I want. And for some reason, well, that's why. Let me I'm going to cheat somewhere real fast. Don't mind me. I'm doing something to fix a symptom. All right. So you can see a little bit. If I let me exaggerate his legs again, even further out, so you can see it more. You can see the little toes are above the ground, where the big toe is resting on the ground. And of course, a human doesn't stand like that. So what I would do, there's two choices. One is I can bend the knees and move the knees a little bit, or I could move the ankles a little bit just so his feet rest. And those are the things you'd think about if you're posing a miniature. So let's go ahead and do the simple part. I'm going to mask the rest of the leg because I'm in the symmetrical version. It's masking both sides. Now I can move this little magic gizmo to the side or to the feet and scale down or rotate so that the toes are flat. The other thing when you're looking at heroic poses is the hero points his toes out. And so I'm going to do that too with the other axis and rotate his feet so they're pointing out. So now he looks much more heroic than he did before. And again, this is a technique for making your miniatures dramatic, just like you would in a comic book. And so exaggerated stances, exaggerated features. Now, do I want things like a character leaping in the air? Well, if I do a character leaping in the air, it needs to be resting on something. So now I'm sculpting a log or a wall. And some players don't like that because the wall moves with the miniature or the stump moves with the miniature. So it depends on the style that you want and the kind of game you play. And so most of the time I keep my characters grounded. So they at least have to have 1 foot on the ground or potentially 1 hand on the ground if you want them like kicking or something. And so that's the pose. So this simple heroic pose I use a lot because it's about the character and their costume, less about their pose. But I do dynamic poses too where they're running or they're lunging and things like that. The next thing you want to look at, okay, is do we want him standing face front or do we want him have slightly an angle? And so I'm actually going to go back and, nope, I want to keep that. So I'm going to go back forward. I'm going to mask him a different way. And so this time I want to mask at the hips. All right. And what I'm going to do is, yeah, that'll work. And move just, why is it, that'll work. Let me turn off symmetry. So now I'm turning off symmetry. And I want to center this mask to the middle of the hips. And I'm going to turn it a little bit. So he's got that, his body's turned facing in a different direction. So this creates a dynamic pose without deforming the guy very much. And that actually works pretty well. So you've already got a different look for this miniature just by rotating at the hips, right? Well, I can make that yet more dramatic if I switch the mask and then continue rotating his body even more, right? So I want to adjust just a little bit. Now I've got his almost 50-50. So I've moved the hips and legs in one direction and the upper body in the other direction to get a more dynamic look. And I'll take off the mask and you can see how much that changes. Well, we want him to face forward, right? Well, here's where I have another technique. Since I have multiple pieces of this model, I've got eyes. Well, you can see already I caused my own problem, right? So his eyes are in the wrong place and his eyebrows are in the wrong place. So now I have to undo some of the changes I made. Luckily, the legs don't affect anything else but his shorts. We're going to fix those later. But what I want to do this time is include the eyes and the eyebrows in the move. And so I have an option here in ZBrush where it's going to move all of the objects in the scene instead of just one. And now I can go back and move. And you can see as I'm rotating him and his shoulders to get that look I liked, everything else is moving, including his shorts, right? So, but the most important thing for me right now, since the shorts are already out of whack, is I got the eyebrows and the eyes at least, right? So very, very simple. Masking is an incredibly powerful part of the software. And of course, they got the idea from Photoshop, where you can do the same thing in 2 dimensions that we're doing here in 3 dimensions. So let me grab and mask, whoops, mask his body a little bit again. Now, the only thing unmasked is the head. And again, I'm not symmetrical anymore because I've got the body moved in lots of directions. And then I can turn his face. Oh, well, yeah, the shorts too. The shorts are going to fall. I'm like, wait a minute, his legs are moving. It's not his legs. But I do have something going on underneath. I'm going to turn off the floor, zoom in a bit, and undo because we've masked his chin. So you do have to be careful with masks. It's powerful, but you can go a little too far. So that actually works better. So now I can rotate his face, right? And I have this wonderful new pose that I like. And I haven't even moved his arms. In fact, I like this pose a lot. What I'm going to do is show you how I can then move pose his hands. There's a different tool I can use. So this gizmo thing you can do a lot with masking and moving the gizmo. The challenge is it's constantly turning the gizmo on and off, adjusting the mask, and that can be hard if you have a complex model. So let me show you another tool that's in this product's tool bag, and I'm going to go to a hand. If I can get it zoomed in, so I've got this hand, and I want to pose it to change the pose. So I have another concept. It's an anchor brush, it's called. I have it on rotate, so I can create 2 points. So I'm going to do this point and this point, and now when I move, it's actually changing everything from the wrist to the tip of the finger. If I change those anchor points like that, now it's moving differently. So the brush takes a little bit of getting used to, which is why I don't use it as much. But let's just try the tip of the finger and see. Now that is pretty close to what I wanted. And now I can actually move the whole body, which is not what I wanted. So with a little bit of playing around, I can change and pose the hand. So that worked pretty well. Actually, that's not as bad as I thought it would be. Whoa. One of the things about this brush is it's looking at the computer's processing based on the angle I'm looking at the model. So that's why when I'm at a different angle, it can get really wild. But I've got almost this OK symbol on his fingers. Let's try this. So that's just that brush. You can play with it quite a bit. And let's go here and here and twist it instead. And now I'm turning the hand back around. So let me do it this way. So now he's got this symbol. He's signaling somebody in his heroic pose. Maybe he's got a magic spell. Hey, Geeky. Just so you can see that I can do that. I'm going to actually jump to a different tool and we'll come back and finish this guy. Actually, some weird things happened to his eyebrows when I was working. What is going on? So I'm back to the original hand. So the other thing, remember, is I can mask, right? So if I just don't want to do that, let's mask at the shoulder and try and get a similar result that I had before. Oh, need to go back to rotate. And this way. Oh, I like that a lot better. Darn it. And then I can use traditional things like moving the pixels around one at a time just to make the finger look more natural. So I've got that thumb moved. Make it a little sharper at the knuckles. Right. Part of the reason it's acting the way it does is the way these lines flow. You can see, let me turn on polyframe. So you can see there's this line that goes down his hand to his thumb. And then there's rings around the thumb in different places. Well, those affect how the software is going to move it. It can't read your mind. And so it's going to base it, they call this edge flow. So they're going to take that edge and try and flow along those edges. So sometimes it'll be a very smooth line. Sometimes it'll be a very jagged line. And that's just because the software is trying to interpret your movements to the edge and the circles, right? So it can't bend. If I zoom, I'm going to zoom in one more time. It can't bend between those two spaces. So it's not going to be able to put a bend here. It can only do a bend where there's that circle of that line. And so I think you guys understand what I'm saying. Sometimes I'm speaking very technically about the software, but I try and explain what I'm doing and what you're seeing as much as I can. So I'm going to try and move this finger again. So let's make sure I have the right brush. Okay, there's the first movement. So I'm being a little more careful where I'm putting the dots this time. There's another. There's another. And that's one of the nice things. One of the reasons this is so fast is I can just keep moving those dots. And now I have a finger that's bending in a very unnatural way. So then I go back to my traditional tools and let me make the brush bigger, so I can actually move it where the bones are straight, right? So again, it's just something, they're techniques that do really well with certain models and techniques that work really well in other ways. And no matter what you do, there's going to be micro adjustments you have to make. I mean, it's just the nature of working in this kind of environment. So now I have them back to the OK symbol. I like that way better. And now I'm going to do what I was doing before that twisted his whole body. I just want to twist. Actually, I want to twist here and here and move to the twist option. And as you can see, he's now holding his hand at a very different angle. And the nice thing is actually because this is sculpted along human forms, twisting his wrist like that pulled the muscle underneath. I don't know what the muscles are called. I have so much, I haven't studied anatomy that closely. So this muscle here is pulling and this muscle here isn't. And so that's very close to how a human body would actually do it. There's another tool that's available that I really couldn't get the hang of that actually helps pronate and supinate the arms, the way the muscles actually work. It's a very powerful tool, but I just do it the slow way. I don't do it the fast way. So he's got a pose. Now I'm going to jump to another tool to show you it's not really officially rigging, but it's close. And so there's a feature called Z spheres in this software where you're making, let's turn off this thing. Why is it still showing? Well, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. Let me. So Z spheres look like this. And so what you're able to do with this particular software is create multiple spheres, and you can sculpt with this. It's very rudimentary, but it's mostly used for creating a form. So I just made an arm, and then I can create a hand. Let's do it the right way. And then I want to put fingers on here. We'll make him the 3-fingered hand. if I can remember. I don't use this software that much anymore, this feature, but now I've got an arm with 3 fingers, and you saw how fast that was, right? But it's still very, very rudimentary because it's just using these spheres, right? And so, but once you make this, I can use this as a rig to pose another model. And again, this is a feature that's available. I don't use it that much because of my workflow, but it's a very powerful feature. So as you can see underneath this ghostly image, there's a hand that I made with those Z spheres. So it's got the wrist and the fingers and everything. And what I can do once I have that, and if I have a sculpt to bind it to so that the spheres, when they move, it moves the rest of the sculpt, then I can, it's effectively a very simple rig. So I'm going to bind the mesh again and show you what that does. Is so now whenever I move the Z sphere, it moves, it's like moving the bones. Right, and you can see I've got that thumb moved. Let's do the Spock live long and prosper symbol. Right, so it looks great in this shadow form. Live long and prosper. I think this goes up more. And you can see how much easier it is to move and get the basic pose. Now let's look at how that is going to look, right? That actually looks pretty good. But you can see there's still challenges even with this technique, that it's created this weird crease where the thumb works with the hand. And I can maybe increase the density, and it doesn't want to do that. So what I would have to do, I can go back, turn off that preview, and let's move the thumb. Whoops. That's pretty close. I want to move it like that. That's not bad. And then preview it again. And now I have a posed version of a dwarf hand doing live long and prosper, right? So this is actually really slick. Now, if I make this into a mesh, you can see that the fingers are now merged. And where the thumb attaches to the hand is merged. So if you're going to use this technique, you really have to understand what's going to happen after you finished. And so you're not going to be able to make as many changes after you've posed it with this technique. But during the posing, you can get some really, really nice results. And because I'm constantly making different kinds of characters that are different sizes, different shapes, it's hard for me personally to create that rig that's going to work for all the characters. I need a dwarf rig, I need a human rig, I need a giant rig, I need rigs of different sizes and shapes and stuff. And so I just sculpt for fun, so I haven't had to build that discipline, because I can get similar results from other techniques. But I just wanted to show you that ZBrush has lots of options to get things done, and many of them are quite powerful. And I'm going to come back to our guy. So he's posed, except for what? His shorts, right? So I can, once I pose the body, pose the shorts. And so another technique I use when I'm sculpting is I'll make a character, I'll make the hard surface pieces, belt buckles, shoulder, pauldrons, helmets, swords, and then pose that all together, because all I have to do is move his sword once I get his hand done, and then add the clothes. because then I'm adding the clothes where the body is. Instead of trying to pose the clothes and get the wrinkles right, I create the clothes with the wrinkles in place. And again, that technique works really well because of what I do, which is make miniatures. Now, if you're going to animate or everything, you just have to put it in that Y pose we started with. And then your rig and your animation tools will have to deal with how that's supposed to move. Does it stay rigid? Does it deform? Like right to the skin? How does the skin deform? How does gravity work? That's why rigging gets really, really complicated. I don't have to worry about that because I'm just making something that's going to be in a static pose for the rest of its existence. So I've selected the shorts and I can use some of the same techniques. So the first I want to do is see if rotating is going to give me part of what I want, and it will. So let me turn off symmetry and put it in the center. So if I just rotate, I've got everything rotating, so let me turn off everything and just rotate the shorts. And I get pretty close to his waist. And then I need to move the legs. So I can do the same kind of techniques I did before where I mask. And then, let's mask one leg at a time because I'm no longer using symmetry. Move the shorts out, move them up a little bit. That's pretty close. And then I need the other side. And move those. All right, now I'm pretty close. And as I mentioned before, when you're moving things around, there's always little micro adjustments. So in this case, I just need to get a good brush size and move the shorts so that they're not sticking inside his body, because shorts don't do that. At least no shorts I've ever worn have stuck inside my body. You guys might have magical shorts that do that. I do not. And make sure there's cuffs in his legs, things like that. So pretty quickly, maybe make his shorts not quite so tight to his body. And I've shown wrinkles and other things in another stream, so I'm not going to replicate that today. But I think I've got a pretty good body movement for a dynamic character. All right, now the other thing I would need to do, especially in the case of his shorts, if I just show you those, there's an inside to these shorts. Well, it looks really good on screen, but if I try to print that, he's going to be wearing shorts that slide off and off his body, and it's going to be like 1/10 of a millimeter in width, and so it's not really printable. And so what I would need to do is actually thicken up these shorts, and there's a couple of ways to do that. I'm going to do it my way. And so basically, I'm making his shorts actually stick into his body. I told you that I didn't want to do that. But on the inside, it's now going through his body so that when I generate it for printing, it's one piece. So he really doesn't have two parts. It's a single part that's meshed with his body. And that's purely a requirement of physical printing on a 3D printer. For animation, for games, for movies, you would never need to do that. In fact, having it be a separate piece allows you to do some of the physics, math that you want to do with a moving character that's wearing shorts. So now he's got shorts that are inside his body. I need to do something similar with his eyebrows, but that's how I'm posing this character. And with very simple techniques. And most of those techniques are available in Blender and other tools, but you can quickly get it. Well, let me show you then, now that he's posed. Whoops. Turn off the mask. Turn off the mask. And let's get him back to his top level. So here he is at his top level of resolution, and his finger looks really good. I lost knuckle resolution on the move. Let's zoom in really close so you can see what I mean. So his finger actually handled really well and held pretty well, but you don't see the same definition of his knuckles that you saw in the original. So that's something I would fix. I might give him better fingernails, depending on how big or small this model is supposed to be. But other than that, that posing technique worked really well. And you can see that's why having that lower resolution is helpful when you're posing miniatures. Um, so really nice. So I'm going to give you guys another view of another character. And this is the finished version of, is this Ghost Geralt? I don't think so. Yep, that is Ghost Geralt. So if you've been paying attention to the Kickstarter, Gerald Geisengax is Ghost. And so I sculpted that for the game. We do need GUI shorts, Geeky. You're absolutely right. We should petition for that. So this was really fun. And you notice, let me show you the other Gerald. Same sculpt overall. I changed his pose for the ghost. So he's looking in the different direction, his arms in a different pose. I didn't go overboard on the changes, but just enough so he's a different miniature. And you would, of course, paint him differently. So here's the original Geralt before pre-ghost, right? And he's holding like a crystal or a gem or something. And, he's, very different look from his counterpart that's a ghostly form. But it's the same character, so that's one of the reasons it's nice to have the model sculpted in such a way so you can change. So this is one piece. So if I show you, this is all one model. So trying to change this guy into anything is going to be very difficult because I'll turn that back off. So this hanging sleeve has to be accounted for. The tight sleeve on his arm has to be accounted for. These shoulder or these almost like armor pieces up on his upper body shouldn't change shape. But if I try and move, they will, right? So if I'm moving his cloak, it's going to change that, which is not good. So you want to be making those pose changes before you get to the solid model. He's got glasses on. If I turn his head, his glasses are going to go all wonky. So posing is often best with all the different component parts. And so you want to do that. But I want to do, this is, you've seen, if you've been to the Kickstarter page, you've seen this model. He's been unlocked as one of the stretch goals, this STL file. So you'll be able to print this out and have it at your table. But this is the ghostly Geralt. And the other thing I did, I thought that was kind of fun is normally I don't do this. It's solid underneath, but I have holes in his robes at the bottom, his ghostly robes. And when he prints, those will be there. And so when you paint, you'll actually be able to see through the bottom part of his body. So it prints. I printed this one. I did a test print of this one, and it works really well. And so he'll be fun to paint on the table. Or if you have translucent resin, I'll show a picture next week. You can just print him in translucent resin, maybe ink it or something like that, and it's done because it's already ghostly when you print it. Now, this guy would need to be painted when you print him, but he should print really well. I made his cloak extra thick so it's not fragile. And he's ready to go. I put his fingers together on the offhand, and again, so he'll print without breaking. So the only fragile part, although he prints successfully, is the side of his glasses, because they're clear, so you can paint his eyes and have his glasses on. And but you have to be careful when you remove the top of his glasses. Now, another preview for you. So there's going to be at least one more version of Geralt, maybe two, using this original sculpt. So these are the finished products for these two, but I do have more. The other thing I'm working on is I have this fawn. I've lost part of my microphone. Hopefully you can hear me again. I have this fawn character, um, but she's very, very fragile because she's less than an inch tall because she's small. And so the legs get fragile. The edge of her dagger gets fragile. So I'm going to redesign it. And this may become a future stretch goal. If I can get it done in time, it'll be a stretch goal as part of the um, Kickstarter. So the fawns are part of the story. So a secret that only those of you watching this video will know. Um, can I make Gary translucent? So in the printing process, for sure. Let me see if I have. I probably do. I'm going to do some magic here in the computer. Oh, it doesn't like it. Give me a second. Boom, 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 boom. And then my computer may blow chunks because I'm running a Twitch stream while I'm doing an active render, but I think it's going to work. Let me put a floor. Let me add perspective. And let's render. So what I just did, so ZBrush is lots of power, and I also have some other software that I render in. And what it's doing is I've told it that it's a tinted glass material, and using this real-time renderer, it's actually processing this sculpt in that material. And so he's actually, he looks like he's a glass statue with this material. But I just wanted to show you that you can do that. So there's Gary. I can't turn him because it's rendered, right? So I can render it at different points like you would with a photograph. But I can't animate this particular tool to render this way. So that's with tinted glass. That looks pretty good. Let me turn it a little bit, see if there's another cool material we can try. What is that? Oh, that's not bad. So that's a shadow catcher. So it's basically as if he's next to the wall and taking on the properties of the wall. That's actually pretty cool. So you can see you can play with this software and do all kinds of fun stuff. Rose tinted glass. Wow. And you can see it even the way I've set this up. It's on a reflective table, so you can see the rose tinted glass underneath him. So I can render lots of different things in this software and even more in Cinema 4D, which I also own. Here's how would he look in wax? But with my resin 3D printers, a little bit with FDM, but more so with resin, there are translucent resins that basically light goes through. And if you have any of my gooey cubes, the little green cubes that I was giving away a few years ago, that's the resin that I still use for translucency. So I've printed Gerald in that green resin, so he's translucent and a little bit gooey. So I'm going to have that. And then the other, I just use a traditional standard gray resin because it's easy to paint. I can primer it and paint it without any trouble. I can prime the translucent green, but the primer, because it's translucent to start with, and primer can sometimes be translucent, you get different effects. So But yeah, this wax, it's taking longer to render because the material reflects in different ways. So that's why it's actually having to process and think so much. So it's not as fast as the other renders. But considering this is going on in real time and getting this kind of effect, pretty powerful software. And that Redshift renderer is really good stuff. So I can get most of what I need with that. I don't yet have materials that match my printed materials. I have some that are close. But yeah, this looks like a wax sculpt. It actually looks pretty cool. I haven't showcased most of the rendering stuff because it's not part of my workflow really, except when I'm going to put it on my Mini Factory website. I have a render, a 3D print, and often a painted version, so you can see the different stages of what it looks like. The render shows things that you really have to be close up to the miniature to see. But yeah, now we have Geralt in wax. There we go. I'm going to actually save that. That one's pretty cool. Okay. So does anybody have any questions about this stuff? I was just, like I said, I just wanted to show posing. And this is a simple pose again. And so is this one. It's powerful. It's going to look good on the table. You don't have to do him scrunching up or running or things like that. I do have miniatures in some very dynamic poses. In fact, let me grab a couple just to show you what you can do. GUI creations, PCs. So a simple pose for this female character. She's actually a wizard, but I thought even wizards could strike a pose. And so this is her, and in that same wax material. Let's go back to standard materials because that's a little bit too much. All right. And then I have Calliopeia. And this is a very simple pose. This was a miniature I did quite some time ago. I mean, she's got the Oni mask on her head and bow and arrow on her back and her naginata. So she's a really slick mini. She actually prints multi-part because she can get fragile if you try and print her all at once. Let's see. Here's another one. An interesting pose. I was trying, this is in my all poses have to be dramatic phase. And so I've got her in this super dramatic pose. Let's see. Then I did this one. This is Corny. I think that's, or Corinne. I don't know how it's actually pronounced, honestly. And some people love this pose. And she's got a lot of detail. She's got her daggers on the back and, crossbow bolts and daggers. I mean, it's really nice mini. Don't get me wrong. Got her scar on her, but not everybody likes their miniature on the table crouched down. But again, this was a pose that was a lot of fun. Some simple poses. This one's pretty dramatic. And he's this tall, lanky figure. And so, in this pose where he's got a dagger in each hand, but they're not in the standard dagger positions. This one was a lot of fun. So that one worked out really well. Trying to make sure every miniature doesn't look like every other miniature. Here's another guy with two weapons, but in a very different pose. So this one was also very fun to sculpt and make work. His cloak print's fine, but it is a little thin. But he looks really good. And of course, his face is different than the other faces, which is important to me as well. SC was really simple. Oh, magic users, like I mentioned, you really do need them to have a good pose. Since he's got a wand, I took this idea from somebody online that the best way to sculpt wizards or mages is how you would sculpt a composer of an orchestra, and because they have all these really dramatic poses as they're conducting music. And so that I got this directly from a picture of a conductor in motion. And so really straightforward pose, but it's super dynamic on the table. So that one was really fun. Um, oh, here's everybody's favorite Fleegan. So he's also in. Darn it! There we go. I have so many minis. And so here's Fleegan. He's a really small dude with a big head, and so I just had to find a way to give him a pose that made it look fun. And so Fleegan is available in 3 dimensions. So if you play the game and somebody at the table plays Fleegan, feel free to grab it. And then Glenn is somebody I kind of went overboard on his pose. This is where I went super dynamic and dramatic. Um, Super fun. I had to make the arrow oversized so it wouldn't break. And some of the bow pieces, it's still a little bit fragile, but darn if that pose isn't striking. That was a fun miniature to do. Let's see if there's any besides him that I want to showcase. Oh, yep. Gotta showcase Ignish. Another picture of a conductor in action. And I had to make his wand very big because he's really small. He's about half an inch tall. Because he's a halfling or a gnome or something. And so his wand's big, but it prints really slick, really nice. NPCs, anybody amazing? Well, this is something that's really nice to show is a simple pose can still be super striking, and she painted up super nice. I don't have the painted version handy, but she's holding her bow. She's got her quiver on her back, and on the table, this looks really, really good. And you get a wonderful opportunity to paint her face because of the way she's posed. You don't, when you're painting, your brush can actually focus on the face. If they've got a sword in the way or something, the hair's flowing around, you can't actually get access to the face for the best paint job. So this was a nice pose. Just thinking about what a miniature painter might like to do. And then I guess, is there anybody else that I just have to show? I don't think so. I'll show one though that I thought. Oh, I guess I'll show two more. I'm going to show if it doesn't stop moving on me. This is another wizard, but instead of giving him a wand and an action pose, he's in the what the hell are you talking about pose. And very, very fun. So a simple pose, but you get a lot of emotion and a lot across with it because he's crossing his arms. And sculpting somebody with their arms crossed is a lot harder than you ever want it to be. Holy smokes. I still don't have it perfect, but that one turned out pretty good. There was another one I wanted to show. And this will be it for today. So this is a traditional barbarian, somber pose. He's got his hands crossed over his weapon. Since he's got this two-handed sword, it's big, so his hands are way up close to his face. But it does work fine. It was very successful. And this is Orig, one of the pre-gen PCs available if you go to conventions. But this big muscular barbarian that's actually a paladin. He's changed his ways and fighting for good and justice and everything. But another view of a character where pose is a big part of the character. It's not just about the sculpt, it's about the pose. So that's my posing sculpt miniatures for, or posing sculpts for miniatures for today. I really had a good time sharing all my techniques with you and part of my workflow. And again, we have maybe one or two more ZBrush episodes, and then I want to get to other topics and not bore you guys to tears with how you sculpt in ZBrush. Thanks for being here, and you guys have a great evening. And if you haven't backed to Kickstarter, go back to Kickstarter.